Great, so we have about 20 minutes here. I'm going to go through 2 or 3 questions to give an overview of these founders and their organizations, and then we'll have time for audience questions. I think there's going to be some microphones that will be passed around as well. So to get started, I might start down at the other end with Rodney. If you could describe what your organization does, and specifically how it bridges a gap and what problems that may solve for groups and or people that you're trying to help.
Thanks, Press. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to try to project because I'm a little under the weather. But so Press and I actually go quite back. So we're both co-founders of the Impact Hub and also the Social Impact Breakfast. And one of the things that I recognized was that we needed more support around social impact investing and also philanthropy, both in Baltimore but across the country, to make sure that we're identifying opportunities for individuals and institutions to invest in individuals and groups that were doing phenomenal social impact work, but they were not necessarily being identified and supported previously. And so the work of Invested Impact is really partnering up with corporations, individual philanthropists, institutional philanthropy, and impact investors. And if you're not familiar with impact investing, it's really the opportunity to make a financial return while making social impact simultaneously, right? And so what we're doing is we're partnering up with an array of partners both in Baltimore and across the country to identify new solutions for them to invest into, particularly solutions that identify opportunities to close the racial wealth gap here in Baltimore and across the country.
Great, thanks, Rodney. And Kelly, can you tell us a little bit about Business Volunteers Maryland?
Sure. So Business Volunteers started about 13 years ago, and our mission is really about building a stronger community by engaging businesses, developing civic leaders, and connecting volunteers to meaningful organizations where they can really contribute their time and talent in the most effective way. And in terms of how we see bridging the gap, really bridging a gap is really about creating connections. And so there are these incredible nonprofit social impact organizations. There's 3,500 in Baltimore City alone that are doing really incredible, important work. And to really, and Fagan talked about this, to really allow them to really address social change and really scale their organizations, they need access to outside resources and expertise to really elevate their work. And for a lot of these organizations, they may not have access to marketing or accounting skills or different things that can help them move beyond. So we're really a matchmaker of time, talent, and expertise to move organizations forward.
Great. And Diamond, can you tell us a little bit about the Inner Harbor Project?
Yes, the Inner Harbor Project is a youth-led initiative dedicated to making the Inner Harbor a more safe and inclusive space. So we employ high school students from grades 9 through 12 to come and work on the social issues within the Inner Harbor. So we have youth engagement training, and their job is to bridge the gap between youth and police officers, and our youth conduct trainings to the officers on how to have a better open relationship. We also have a Harbor Card, which is a teen incentive discount card for the teens to pair the gap with youth and store owners so they can shop freely within the Inner Harbor area. We also have a peer mediation team. So their job is to bridge the gap between teen and teens, because sometimes they can get out of control. And lastly, who else am I forgetting, y'all? Okay, thank you. And then lastly, we bridge the gap between Baltimoreans and the Inner Harbor. A lot of people forget, because the Inner Harbor is such a big tourist attraction, that it is also a public space for us Baltimoreans. So we have a Peace Ambassador program where we send our youth leaders out in blue shirts, and their main job is to promote positivity. They are certified tourist ambassadors within the area, so their job is to be helpful, be friendly, and promote positivity within the Inner Harbor.
Great. Diamond, and I'll kind of continue with you on our next question. So obviously a lot of your work is focused on the Inner Harbor and it's sort of a place-based strategy there. And you've done a lot of great work with obviously youth in the city. But can you talk a little bit more about why that work is important for Baltimore as a city as a whole?
Yes. This is one thing that I am extremely about, and it is not because I am a youth. In order to solve a youth problem, you must include youth. And you cannot say you talk to a couple of them and then give your input anyway. You have to make these young people and equip them with the skills to show them that they are leaders. And these young people that I have the pleasure of working with will soon be running Baltimore City. They're your next mayors, council members. These kids are extremely bright. And it's my job to invest them with the skills that they need ahead of time so they can see how bright their light really is.
Great, thank you, Diamond. Same question for you, Kelly. Why is the work that Business Volunteers Maryland important for the city?
So our organization really approaches our work around the concept of social responsibility, and that definition is an ethical framework that suggests that an entity, be it an organization or an individual, has an obligation to act for the benefit of society at large. And so when we think about our work and how we're approaching our work, we're really helping entities, so whether it's an individual or an organization, fulfill their social responsibility and connect with meaningful causes, organizations that are doing great work, but again, I sort of mentioned before, that may not have the capacity to maximize their potential. And so by creating those strategic connections, another part of this puzzle is that you need to prepare people for how they contribute and how they give and how they come in contact with different organizations and issues. And you also have to have the capacity to receive the volunteers. So all of our work and how we're building a stronger Baltimore is about preparing, educating, supporting both nonprofit organizations and the people and businesses that want to do good, and making those right connections where you can contribute your expertise and your passion and your time. And I'll talk a little bit more a little later, but and it kind of got mentioned by Jamie and Fagan, but going deeper and really using your unique expertise, your unique talents, is what I really think is going to change Baltimore, and we've seen it start to happen, and I think, as Fagan said, we're on the cusp, and we need to really turn the corner on that. And so we're trying to make matches happen that are really strategic and thoughtful.
Great, and Rodney, you and I have talked a lot over the years about how to better support entrepreneurs in the city, and particularly entrepreneurs of color. I know that you've done a lot of work with philanthropy, and the ultimate goal really is to support entrepreneurs. Can you talk a little bit more about why your work's important for the city?
Yeah, and I think Fagan put it very well. So typically, those who are closest to the problems really are closest to the solutions, but simultaneously, they're also furthest away from power and resources, right? And that's really profoundly deep. So we're in a city that's majority African American, for example. And here's a statistic for you. The Associated Black Charities, maybe 3 years ago, put out a report that really investigated small businesses, and particularly African American owned businesses in the city of Baltimore. And they discovered that only 8% of black owned businesses in Baltimore had employees, right? And so that's a tremendous statistic. How do we really advance a local economy that's majority African American when the majority of black owned businesses in the city do not have employees, right? So how do we expand opportunity? How do we invest in individuals and companies and social enterprises that really are closest to community that can create those opportunities? And so that's why it's really important for us, right? We really have an expanding economy in Baltimore City. At the same time, it's not really inclusive of the majority of residents, right? And so while we have to hold the promise and expand the promise of the city, we have to be making sure that the majority of individuals in Baltimore City have opportunities to become entrepreneurs, to create jobs, to have jobs, to hold jobs, right? And so finding mechanisms and tools for individuals to participate in and expand opportunity for individuals across the city are really important. And so one opportunity that we helped to create last year was in a partnership with the Calvert Social Investment Foundation and our partners Humanum, which is a phenomenal human services organization and social enterprise developer based out of East Baltimore. And so what we did is we created this campaign which allowed individuals in Baltimore City to invest in the product where they would actually get a return on investment, 3%, but it was social impact capital. So social impact capital that can be invested into small businesses and real estate projects that were very inclusive in ensuring that individuals in Baltimore had opportunity. And so we were able to, over the past year, raise about $4.5 million in actual investment for the city of Baltimore, which will continue to advance. And then we'll be able to invest in companies in real estate in the city that are really inclusive.
Great. So I understand we have about 5 minutes left, but I do want to make sure we have a chance to answer some audience questions. Is there anybody that would like to ask a question for this panel?
Good morning.
So one of the critiques of the philanthropy world is that they choose a certain sector to give to, right? Youth programs, workforce. Do you think that's a problem within the volunteering world as well? There's like a trend, the hip thing to volunteer for. And if so, how can we make that more sustainable to have volunteers in all sectors?
That's a really good question. I mean, theoretically, I understand why philanthropy and why foundations and companies invest in certain mission areas or sectors, largely because that may be why the foundation was founded, or that may be the focus areas of a business. I also think it speaks to what you connect to and what your passion is if you're an individual giver. So I think it's a fine philosophy to do, and you should really connect to something that speaks to you personally. At the same time, and then to speak to volunteerism, I think people volunteer largely, one, because they're interested in a mission, it somehow spoke to them. It could be that a family member had a health issue, or that they're seeing environmental issues in their backyard and they want to do something there. I do think the number one reason people volunteer actually is because they're asked. So I think sometimes some organizations get more volunteers and more attention because they do a better job asking. So I think one way to sort of elevate the opportunity or the connection to organizations that people may not think about is to help them send the message of need, and for them to make the ask might be one way to change that. We run the Volunteer Center for Baltimore City, so we're connecting with 5,000 to 10,000 people each year, reaching out to us and saying we want to get connected. And we do see really diverse interests. I would say there's a concentration around education and youth, and that may just be a common thread that people focus on. But I think we would really benefit if we really told the story of workforce development and of training people in different ways. Or one of the biggest problems I see in Baltimore City is that only about 65 to 70% of students are graduating from high school. So what are we doing around the education system? I'm being a little long-winded about this, but sorry. So I think we need to elevate the needs and the causes and the way that people can connect to get people to being more diverse about where they volunteer.
So I agree with Kelly. One thing that I advise any volunteer to think about is, one, when you enter in a volunteering agreement or you seek out the opportunity, really do meet the organization or individual where they are and actually do what they are asking, right? Oftentimes, while theoretically it makes sense to really align your passion with your volunteer opportunity, there are oftentimes organizations in Baltimore City need very specific things, right? And they might not align up with your particular passion, but you might have a skill set, you might have friends and colleagues that can really bring some resources to bear. So really think about the change that you're attempting to make, right? The change that these leaders in these different communities are actually leading on, and how you can be most useful to them. The other thing I'd add is that many areas, great question in terms of philanthropy, but many areas are just sort of underinvested in, right? I really think, I think about economic development, I think about the opportunities that we have in this city to really advance wealth in communities that we don't often think about. And what does that look like when we have these vast inequities in terms of wealth in the city? So many of you are, young professionals. You're doing phenomenal work in your day jobs and you're volunteering, and I thank you for contributing to the city's fabric. But also think about some of those areas that you might not be as informed about, that might actually need you as well, because we have so many areas that could use improvement in the city. So we're getting great questions. So the question was, just if you didn't hear, would I prefer for a philanthropist to give to a social impact investment that will sort of concurrently allow for you to get social impact and get a more modest return on investment, or would you want someone to invest in a more traditional investment vehicle that will return greater return, but then give you more money for your philanthropy? So I don't think it's a either or. I think you can do both, right? I do think that there are mechanisms that allow us, because it's very underutilized, quite frankly. Most people don't think about how they can leverage their investment capital to actually improve society or actually their local community. And so we're trying to create more vehicles to do that. But I think we have to find opportunities to do both, right? It's not an either or. Quite frankly, one of the things to think about is if you're able to identify an organization that's creating quality jobs in East Baltimore where individuals are getting living wage jobs, why not invest in that? And then that allows you to have more flexibility in your philanthropy as well, right? So there's a whole array of ways of thinking about it. You should also consider how to think about your philanthropy and your investment sort of as a traditional portfolio approach as well, right? So you want to have your more traditional philanthropy. You want to have opportunities for you to expand your philanthropy in ways that might allow for an impact hub or a Baltimore core to expand, but then also have your traditional mechanisms as well, right? I could not answer and say that I would have a preference for either one, but we really need to find opportunities where we can do both.
Great, thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I encourage you to connect with the panelists during the break. But if I can get a big round of applause for our panelists, that'd be cool.